Today's episode has been brought to you by
Schedulicity.
Here it is, episode 64 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast with today's guest, Kristen Sweeney, who is a yoga teacher, a coach, and the founder of Edge of the Mat. I'm your host, Shannon Crow, a mother of three, a yoga teacher, and a consultant for yoga teachers who really want to dig in and create a profitable and sustainable yoga business. The Connected Yoga Teacher podcast is a place where you can also feel supported and connected every week to information, inspiration, and a community of other yoga teachers and entrepreneurs. This podcast is a place where you can tune in and listen as you drive, walk, garden, clean, or do whatever it is that you do while you listen to podcasts. It's here for you between the classes, workshops, and trainings that you are teaching or attending. All of the show notes and links for today's episode can be found at theconnectedyogateacher.com/64. Thanks to our Connected Yoga Teacher team, Laura, who writes the show notes, Samantha, our VA, Rob, our audio editor, and to our sponsor, Schedulicity. Here is Michaela with the hot tip of the week.
Hey Connected Yoga Teachers, this is Michaela with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. When you're thinking about teaching in a new studio, take a class there if you haven't before. Pay attention to their check-in and payment process. Scope out their online presence as well as their classroom vibe. If you notice they're missing a website, online booking, email marketing, or class planning, check out a few of our 5-minute webinars and spend a little bit of time getting familiar with Schedulicity's class booking options. Now, when you feel ready to introduce yourself as a potential teacher, you can give yourself an extra edge. It's also free to do with Schedulicity. Plus, our support rock stars are always ready to help you learn in a live chat, email, or phone call. You'll be a digital asset to any studio before you know it.
Thank you so much for that, Michaela. I think it's really interesting when we start to look at what are the things that I can offer to a yoga studio. So often, some of that for myself has been helping with the website, helping to set things up on Schedulicity. So I think this is a huge asset that I hadn't really thought about before until you said it. Thanks for that. I want to offer a huge thanks to those of you who helped me to name this podcast. It was really tough for me because it contains so much and I'm looking for a name that's about 5 words long. So that can be really tricky. I knew that I wanted it to be about how to approach a yoga studio. Kristen really gets into that today, but I also wanted it to be about getting hired. And some of you had some amazing words that I wanted to just bring in here. So Adriana said, creating valuable partnerships. Jennifer Parker also said it's really about creating valuable relationships. Ashley Hagen, I have to give a huge shout out to you because I feel like this is as close as we got getting hired by a yoga studio. Yours was getting hired at a yoga studio. Sylvia, you said how to get hired at a yoga studio as well. That was really, I thought, you know what, that's what we're going for. But Matt Brooks wrote building new yoga studio relationships. I love that one also. Ray, you really dug into like what it's like and the struggles that can be there for approaching a new yoga studio. So I hope this episode is very helpful. Some of you said that you were moving, you felt like you were really diving into this new place as well. Anna, you wrote cultivating studio collaboration, studio partnerships 101. I love that. I wish I could include all of these. That's why I wanted to give a shout out. And Becca said how to build positive working connections with a yoga studio. So if I had more words, you guys, I would pick those ones. If you're wondering where this post was, it's in the Connected Yoga Teacher group. This is a Facebook group. It's a private group for yoga teachers. It's a super supportive community in there. We share our challenges. We share things that are helping us in our yoga business. Sometimes there's a share thread where you can share an actual event that you have going on. We keep the self-promo posts really to those share threads so that you can go in and look at the questions and answers and helpful things. And then every once in a while, it's all compiled, like what are yoga teachers offering, because we have a growing global group. And I just need to send out a huge hug to all of you. Sorry, I'm a hugger in case you don't know me in person. Huge hug because you really make this group what it is. I love the conversations in there. I love when people are saying hi and welcome or introducing themselves and other people are commenting on that thread. It just warms my heart. So keep up the great work in there, you guys. If you are enjoying the podcast, the Facebook group, if you have had a consultation call with me and you have something to say about that, we would love to hear from you. You can either leave a review on our Facebook page or in iTunes, or right from our show notes page is probably the easiest way. There's a button there that says leave a review. Also, as many of you know, I love to receive voicemail. So there's a handy button on our website. You can leave 1, 2, 3, 4 voicemails. There is a little time limit on it, but you can just keep talking on the next one. Let's dive in and meet Kristen. Kristen grew up in Tampa, Florida area. She spent almost a decade in New York City as an actor in musical theater before moving to Boston, where she now lives with her husband, Greg, and their mini Labradoodle, Rocky. Kristen began to practice yoga in 2009 at a Bikram studio in Las Vegas. She talks about that in today's episode. Then a couple of years later, she became a yoga teacher. In 2015, Kristen became a coach and founded Edge of the Mat. She has some amazing blog posts over there. I would definitely check out her website. When I was scrolling yesterday, my daughter Sage said, "That's a really nice website, Mom. Who made that website?" And so I actually went down to the bottom. Oh, goodness, it's failing me now. Now I need to go look it up. Okay, I found it, guys. It's June Mango Website Design and Branding. And I went to that website and my daughter said, "Oh, I really like that website as well." So shout out to June Mango and Kristen Sweeney. Your website looks amazing. Kristen says on her website, she believes it's our right to enjoy this life we've been given. I am super grateful for how detailed Kristen got in this interview today. So much that I created a list while I was listening to her tell me the first time. I went through and edited the list, and I know Laura will do that again with timestamps in our show notes. So the show notes for this episode, don't worry, you don't have to jot down a lot of notes. They are there for you. Again, it's the connectedyogateacher.com/64. I'll be here at the end just to do a little recap in case you're like, what are those things again? I'm going to list them off pretty quickly at the end for you just to wrap up and also to give you an actionable step. So let's dive in and meet Kristen. So welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. Kristen, it's an honor to have you here today.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm happy to be here with you.
So tell us how your yoga journey began. Do you remember your first yoga class?
I remember my first yoga class that actually made a real impression on me, and that was in 2009. I was at the time living in Las Vegas, Nevada. I was a performer at a show, like a showgirl show on the Vegas Strip. I was singing there, and I walked into a Bikram yoga studio and took my first true Bikram Hot Yoga class. Walked out of there sweaty, drenched, exhausted, and just totally exhilarated and hooked. I really, really loved the discipline of the sequence. And I think that for me, that coming into the practice in a really structured way was very attuned to kind of like where I was in my life at that time. And then it led me into this bigger world of yoga, which allowed me from there to find more freedom and explore sort of less rigid modalities, although I still definitely have a soft spot for hot yoga.
So that's quite a switch to go from singing in Vegas to teaching yoga.
Yes, it is. You know, I was in Vegas for about 7 months, but I was based in New York City for almost a decade, 9 years. And so once I returned to New York from that particular job, I was still practicing and just kind of all over the city, taking intro specials wherever I could. And I remember thinking to myself, I'd been in New York a few years at that point, and I remember thinking that my day jobs really weren't cutting it for me. I was catering, I was hosting in a restaurant, I was, doing reception work or admin work, the very traditional actor gig life. And I remember thinking acting is so rewarding, but I don't get to perform every day because that life is a lot of auditioning, it's a lot of rejection, and it's a lot of not getting to do kind of the thing that you want to do. So it's a lot of sort of work on the way to get there. Right. And so the thought that I had was, if I'm going to stay in New York and sort of stick this life out and continue, I need to find something every day that's going to feel rewarding for me. And so really teaching yoga became became that thing, because I didn't have to wait 3 or 6 or 9 months before my next opportunity to teach and connect with people. I was able to do that every day or, several times a week. And so really, I think that it's, in a way, it seems like a big shift, but at the same time, it was such a complement and a balance to the very kind of hectic and sort of outward facing, approval seeking way that I in particular was at that time, like the way that I was approaching acting as a profession. And so yoga really just became a place of grounding and kind of refuge and safety, and a way of looking at myself and saying kind of like, no matter what has happened in this day, whether I got the call back or booked the gig or not, I'm enough. And that was so valuable during that time for me.
That's amazing. And so fast forward to now and the place that you're at with yoga and helping yoga teachers, what propelled you to that?
Sure. So Edge of the Mat, which is my company, my business, really started as just a passion project, and it was a blog. So as I started teaching, I felt like, gosh, I have more to say. I have, the practice got my wheels turning so much mentally, and I was evolving and growing, and I had all these thoughts that I wanted to share. So, in the age of the internet, I decided what better way to share them than just get online and put them out there. And so that's really, it was like the genesis of Edge of the Mat, was just this blog where I would kind of think about yoga and write about yoga and the way yoga intersected with life. That was always like very important to me. From there, I continued, I would say, like my personal journey and evolution by working with a series of coaches. So I started by working with a health coach, which led to some deeper spiritual work. And then worked with a couple of different business coaches. And from there, started to feel like, when I looked at Edge of the Mat, that I wanted it to be more. I wanted it to have a bigger reach, to have a bigger impact on people. And I knew that my words were affecting people, because, kind of when I'd least expect it, I'd get an email or a text, or I'd see someone and they go, oh my gosh, I love reading your posts. I love reading your blog. And so I just felt like there was more I could do in that way. And I spent, honestly, a couple of years not really being sure what that would look like. And so I would describe it and I would be like, it's yoga and it's life. And like, I didn't ever have good language around it. And it was, really a struggle from this sort of like marketing perspective of like, what is this thing? And when it really, really clicked for me was I realized that I had this sort of unique skill set that allowed me to help other yoga teachers and do it from this kind of common vocabulary of yoga. And so it wasn't that I was necessarily helping other yoga teachers with their postures, although certainly that's something I've done with clients. They're like, I'm just really trying to figure out how to language this thing. And we like jump on FaceTime, like, well, let's look at it. And, but more that there's sort of a common vocabulary, a common language, a common sort of set of principles and mindset that is shared in this community. And also recognizing that yoga teachers, have a lot of, like, they have all the same struggles as entrepreneurs or freelancers. And then they have some other, I think, unique struggles that have to do with these sort of conflicts between yoga and yoga philosophy and what that means and maybe opposed to what it means to want to run a business that's successful and earns substantial income, and the way that those two things can feel in conflict with one another, I think is unique, not just to yoga teachers, but to a certain kind of subset of freelancers and entrepreneurs, and including actors, actually. And so that's when I recognized I really wanted to work with yoga teachers. That's when things really clicked for me and just started to come together in a whole new way. And so that's really brought me to where Edge of the Mat and where I am today.
Thank you so much for sharing that there was a struggle there where you didn't really know where it was going. And
totally.
You talked about kind of a shift there. Do you remember what that was like, or was it just a slow progression over time, or was there a day where you just had this light bulb moment?
There was I would say both. There was a slow progression toward kind of a light bulb moment. And what really put me over that edge was I was working with a business coach, and she was really encouraging me to like figure out who I was talking to. And so it was really coming at it from a marketing place of who is your audience? Who is this ideal person? And I had fallen into the very common and kind of typical trap of assuming that the more people I could talk to, the better off I would be. When in fact, it seems that the opposite is true. If you're talking to everybody, the kind of phrase goes, you're talking to nobody. And so I got on one of our group calls and I was like, I think I'm talking to yoga teachers. And like her eyes got really big and I was like, yeah. And she was like, and so it was kind of, like I said, a lot of grappling, a lot of sort of mucking around and not being clear and not having the language and trying all these taglines and stuff that didn't feel good. And but I think that work was really important to get me to a place where I could go, aha, it's so clear.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so good. And so I'm curious then, and I'm excited that we get to chat about this today because we're going to talk about really how to approach a new yoga studio as a yoga teacher. And I feel like you have a bit of an edge to this because you said, being this actor and singer, performer, had a lot of putting yourself out there and sometimes rejection and not always getting the part. So I'm excited that you have that perspective as well behind it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that certainly there were some advantages from that of being accustomed to, like you said, just putting yourself out there and doing it. And also, I would say that what is most helpful, yoga teachers who don't have a performing background, no need to worry. I think that there's a kind of clear step-by-step, very methodical process that teachers can go through in both identifying and approaching studios. And when you have that process to support you, taking the risk becomes a lot easier because you feel prepared, you've done the research, you have some sense of what to expect. And that just can make that whole process, although still perhaps a little bit intimidating or scary, much easier and much more smoothly.
Excellent. So do you want to guide us into what this process is?
Sure, absolutely. So the first place that I would actually start, I would back up before ever approaching a studio, is figuring out which studios you want to approach. And that's a step that is really, really critical for a couple of reasons. One is if you, as a teacher, take the time to identify studios that are a really good fit for you, you're just much likelier to get the job, right? And we can kind of get into like what fit looks like. But if you identify a studio that matches your talents with like what they're looking for and what they have is what you're looking for, then that's just going to be a much more harmonious relationship. And you're also more likely to get the job. So fit is really important for that reason. It also is going to help you streamline your efforts and save a lot of time. And so when thinking about fit, that looks like, I kind of alluded to it already, matching your skill set with what that studio is looking for. And so a lot of times what happens is people just kind of default to maybe wanting to teach at the studio where they did their teacher training. And I've done that. It was a great experience. It was really easy. I didn't have to audition. So there are definitely benefits there. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that the number of graduates likely coming out of any one teacher training program, far more than any one studio is going to be able to accommodate once or twice a year, however often they're running their programs. And so it's important to be able to have the capacity to look for some opportunities elsewhere. The most basic place to start is kind of studios in your area that, and I would say studios is the word I'm going to use, but that might look other ways, right? It could be gyms or fitness studios or like whatever that is, places that offer yoga classes where you might teach. So studios might kind of catch-all phrase for that, but doesn't have to be a yoga studio. A good place to start is what style did you train in and what style is this studio offering? So if you trained in Vinyasa yoga, but the studio down the street is an all Iyengar studio, right? That's pretty clear that that's probably not going to be the best fit for you as a teacher. Now, you might love practicing there and it might be really interesting and a great experience, and that's fine. But as a teacher, your skill set doesn't really match what they're looking for. Then you want to consider other factors, like maybe there's a studio that you love, but the commute, it's like an hour and a half away, and that's just not a commute you're really willing to make on a regular basis to practice there. So things like that. vibe of the community, vibe of the studio. What, do you want something that like a very young crowd and very hectic with classes with 50 plus people, or are you looking for something that's much more serene with smaller group classes of like 8 or 10 people? So starting to identify what you want in the experience, and then looking for studios that match what you want, as well as studios that are looking for what you have to offer. So that's the first place that I really like to start.
I like that one because it takes you out of like, I'm desperate and I need this place to work, and more into where would I like to work?
And that just changes the energy so much. And it really, starting the process in that way, exactly, it just shifts every step of that process, so that by the time you're walking in and saying, hey, I'd like to audition here, you've really felt that this is a great place for you, and that you've chosen that studio as much as you're hoping they will also choose you.
Right. And I think in that, do you often suggest that yoga teachers go and do a class, or how do they figure out that vibe?
Absolutely. Yes, I definitely recommend take full advantage of intro specials all over your area. If you're not already familiar with the studios, try to take a variety of classes there. And it doesn't, it doesn't have to be a month or 6 month commitment at one studio. It can be 1 or 2 classes somewhere. And sometimes that's enough to know, but you want to feel comfortable saying, I have a sense of what this studio is about. So definitely going and practicing. I don't think any amount of internet research can make up for that live and in-person experience.
That's amazing. And I often hear from yoga teachers as well that they'll go and they'll either feel that like, oh, this is an amazing fit, or they kind of get a sense like this doesn't actually line up with my values, my goals, or my style of yoga.
Yeah. And I think if it's a studio that maybe you thought was going to be a good fit and you go and the experience just doesn't feel right, try again. Maybe you didn't click with that particular teacher, or maybe it was just an off day for some reason. So if you've if you thought that it would be a good fit and it didn't feel quite right, definitely worth giving it a second class to see how it goes. But then, yeah, if there's an experience that just doesn't really gel well with you, it's totally okay to move on. And I like to say, like, really, if you are employed at 3 yoga studios and you're actively picking up subclasses, you probably are going to teach as much as you want to teach. So it's not a matter of finding 10 different studios to work for. It's really just a small handful of studios that are really going to value you and that you're really excited about.
Awesome. So once we discern like, okay, this is a studio that I would like to work at, then what's the next step?
Sure. So the next step is to plan to actually approach someone. And that could be on your first class, on your third class, after a month, whenever it is. I would take class first, and then I would try to talk to the teacher after class. Now, if that teacher happens to be the owner or the manager, great. You've kind of skipped a step and gone right to the source. But talking to a teacher is great as well. So I would just come up with kind of a 2 to 3 sentence, I'll call it a pitch, but really it's just an introduction to yourself. So, thanking them for the class, tell them your name, you're a teacher as well. Share something you really like about the studio. What resonates with you here? What do you love about the community, or what's really exciting about the way they sequence their classes? And then just make the ask, which is, I'm interested in teaching opportunities here. Who would I need to speak with, or who would I connect with to set up an audition? And I find that in general, the teachers seem to be a bit more empowered to either have or give that information than a work study or a desk person or a time trader. So that's why I definitely recommend speaking with a teacher. And hopefully what you get out of that is either they go, oh, the manager's actually in the back room, let me go grab them for you. Or you get an email and some contact information where you can reach out and set up that audition.
I like that you said, instead of the person who's answering the phone or the person who's working at the desk. I mean, sometimes that's a teacher or the manager, but I like this. And I think, being a teacher, if I were to lead a class and someone approached me at the end, I would definitely offer as much information to help them as I could. Like, okay, here are the steps to go through. And then there's also this conversation going on, I would also be keeping in the back of my mind, oh, there's a sub and I've met them.
Absolutely. And that's not it's really nothing against someone. I mean, work studies, time traders, front desk folks, like all amazing, amazing parts of what makes a studio thrive. My experience is just that you might get someone who is totally in the know there and knows way more than any teacher. And you might get someone who is like on their second shift ever, and like doesn't, is still figuring out mind body. So there's just such a variety of what you can get that I think the teachers are a more consistent place to turn because they're always going to know who their studio manager is.
Right. And I also appreciate that you didn't say, drop a resume off.
Yeah, you can have a resume, but I would probably be more likely to contact the owner or manager via email and attach a resume there. I think that paper around yoga studios tends to get shuffled and a bit lost in the shuffle, which is another reason that if possible, I would try to get the contact information for yourself so you can reach out rather than leaving a business card or your name and phone number or name and email. Of course, if that's the only option that's presented to you, then you can take it. But I think ideally you want to have the power and like have the ability to actually initiate that interaction yourself.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like that. So then that's number 2, really approaching and asking a teacher there. Mm-hmm. And then what would be the third thing?
So the third thing would be hopefully that they write back and say, yes, let's set up an audition. And so it would be kind of planning and preparing the audition. So that looks like getting some information, first of all, recognizing that, let's say there are maybe 3 different typical formats for auditions. So there's kind of the most informal and the most private, where maybe it's just you and the studio manager and you're auditioning them for somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. And it's just the 2 of you in the room, but you're sort of acting as though you're giving a class. So that would be like one format. Things you would need to know about that are, okay, it's just going to be one other person in there. You would need to know the amount of time as well. That's really important so you can kind of structure a sequence accordingly. Yep. And then second would be maybe you are in an actual class. So I've done auditions where, there's a community class on the schedule and they say, yep, we're going to plug you into this slot. You're going to teach this whole class. The manager or owner will take the class, but you're in there with real live students and you're teaching, 60, 75 or 90 minutes. So again, you would need to have a sense of, okay, how many bodies? I'm going to maybe want to think about other elements like lighting and music. Whereas if it's just me and the manager, I'm probably not going to worry so much about music. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but it's a different feel. And also, again, the amount of time you're going to plan for in terms of structuring your sequence. The third option is, I feel like this one strikes the most fear in the hearts of yoga teachers, but it's the round robin approach. Right. So that's a way, it.
I do.
So that's a way of auditioning many yoga teachers at once. So I think, first of all, that can create a bit of a different sort of nervous energy. And as someone who comes from that acting world and has been in many holding rooms with like hundreds of men and women all auditioning, that is an environment and an energy all its own. So the way that's structured for folks who aren't familiar is basically you'll walk in, you'll kind of get assigned a random order, and then collectively the group of people auditioning will teach a class. So everyone gets maybe 5 minutes at a time, and the first person would start with however they would open a class. And I'm going to say this is probably only really applicable for vinyasa classes. I think other styles wouldn't lend themselves to round robin quite so well, but for vinyasa classes. And then the second person will kind of teach, maybe if the first person is doing a seated meditation and some cat cows, then the second person might take you to down dog. And then the third person might do a few sun salutes and so on and so on. But you don't really know what the person in front of you is going to teach. So there's a little bit of being kind of unexpected in the round robin, which can add to the sort of nervous energy of that style. But important to know if that's what the structure of the audition is going to be. So I would say that's the next step, is getting just some details about the audition and trying to determine length of time, who's going to be in the room with you, and what the format is.
That's great. I love those 3 options. I do hear a lot of people doing that solo one, like you said, or sometimes being thrown into an actual class. And the round robin brings up really positive feelings in me because It was something in a teacher training that I took, and then we brought it back to the studio and did it more as a way. We allowed students to come, and any teachers from the area could come and show up. It wasn't an audition. And it was just by donation, and all donations went to a karma fund that bought classes for people who couldn't afford to buy a pass for the studio.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
Yeah.
That's so wonderful. And it is, I think, a really nice way to share energy. But a lot of that has to do with getting into that mindset for sure.
Oh, yeah. And I can imagine if it was an audition, you'd be thinking, oh my gosh, why did they lead into that? Now I have to come out.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, that's fun. Okay, so once the audition, and I just wanted to swing back after the ask, what do you recommend that teachers do if they don't hear back from someone at the studio?
Oh, definitely follow up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also so say you email once, maybe twice, and you haven't heard back, I would let a little bit of time go by, but another great way to follow up is in person. So now that you know who the owner or manager is, it's very likely that they teach at the studio. Not always the case, but often the case. So maybe you take one of their classes, and then afterward you kind of go through that same introduction, and very often you'll hear them go, oh yes, I saw your email. Right. You're that person. Great. Yes. Let's set something up, or email me again and I'll definitely get back to you. Or, so sometimes, you don't have to feel so restricted to just like the email medium. You can go and, make that connection in person as well, as a way of just jogging their memory and following up. Studio managers get a lot of emails. Mm-hmm. And so, I would not take it personally if you don't hear back. I would not take it as a sign of much of anything, except that they are maybe quite busy.
Yeah. Yeah, and random emails. They're not all, what time is that class? But it could be like, I left my scarf there, or can I drop something off? Or yeah. I really appreciate that you said that follow up, and sometimes that email isn't going to get through. And I want to also just add here, I kind of put myself out there a few months ago for a yoga teaching opportunity. And at the time, the person I was speaking with sounded really excited and wanted to talk more. So I sent some more information, sent a video, really put myself out there. And it was just crickets for months. Didn't hear anything back. I had checked in a couple more times. And then it was literally 4 months later when she got back to me and said, oh yeah, okay, let's set that up.
Absolutely. I had a similar experience. So I've moved to Boston 2016, summer of 2016, and was starting from scratch in terms of working with yoga studios. And so at one point within a few months, I was on staff at like 7 different yoga studios, and then sort of did the okay, cull it down, find where's the right fit. So I didn't follow my own process completely. I did a little bit more of a scattershot approach, and then was able to kind of like hone down. But one of the studios I was really interested in teaching at that point in time, I emailed them and they just kind of said like a thanks, but no thanks. Owner got back to me. We're not really looking for subs right now. And that was totally fine. And then I was practicing there one day and I took the owner's class, and several months later introduced myself again, and in person this time. And he was like, oh yeah, we'll set you up with an audition. So I don't really know what changed. Maybe it was something about the amount of teachers they had on staff, but it could have just been the fact that I was an actual face in front of him versus a cold email. So you really never know. And so now I'm, on staff as a sub there. So definitely kind of swinging back around can be really valuable. And then also, if you do get that thanks, but no thanks, and the timing doesn't feel right, just, not taking it too personally, but also letting it breathe for a while is okay too.
Do you have any tips or tricks for teachers who are facing an audition?
Yes. Prepare. So my biggest tip would be to prepare. And I know that in terms of sequence planning, I acknowledge that, there's a range. Some people like to plan their classes down to every transition, and other folks like to go in and kind of wing it based on the bodies they have in the room and the energy and what they're feeling that day. And I embrace all of those approaches. However, for an audition, I would say, even if you tend to be an improviser, I would create a plan so that if you get nervous, you have something really concrete to fall back on. And also, because if you are nervous, time does really funny things. And so you want to, even if you're giving a 10-minute audition, you want to create a little tiny class arc within that 10-minute audition. So that means you want to make sure you're not starting in child's pose for 5 of those 10 minutes. And you want to make sure you're going to hit some sun salutes and a couple standing poses, and then at least something on the floor, and then give them a minute to rest in Shavasana, because every studio owner likes a minute in the middle of the day to rest in Shavasana. So I would, once you find out how long the class is going to be, I would create a plan for that class. And even in the round robin context, I think you can create a plan knowing that it might change. So rather than saying, when my turn comes, I'm going to teach these 5 minutes. The danger in that is, what if you're the second person to go and you're trying to teach like a difficult balancing pose? It's not really appropriate in that place. Or maybe you're the second to last person, and so you really are going to be wanting to teach something more floor bound, like a lying twist, something, happy baby, versus again something that's like really vigorous. So even in a round robin context, I would actually kind of plan an entire class out, and that way when your turn approaches, you kind of know where in the sequence you're at, and you say, oh, you know what, it would be appropriate for me to teach, actually those balancing poses would be a great fit right here. And now I kind of know what that 5-minute sequence looks like. And then, my turn will complete and we'll move on.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. I like to prepare and plan exactly as you said, even if I don't stick to that, which is 95% of the time.
Sure. Well, that structure, I really believe structure gives us freedom. So knowing I can fall back on this lets you sort of deviate, because you're like, all right, if this goes terribly awry, if we're like off in left field somewhere, I can like jump back into my plan and go from there. We won't just totally derail.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's amazing. And then, so after the audition, do you have any kind of follow-up or things that you suggest a teacher think about?
Sure. Oh, the other thing I would say about preparing for the audition is, I would say like prepare yourself as your professional best. And so what I mean by that is like on your best day, on your ideal day, when everything is going just the way you wanted it to go, how do you want to show up to class? And so that might be, some actual physical stuff, like maybe you would wear some mascara and some lip gloss, and maybe you'd wear more makeup, maybe you'd wear none. Maybe you have like a favorite pair of yoga pants that are in good shape. So like just doing those small things to help you feel really confident. And aside from the kind of physical presentation, also like, is that making sure you meditate for 10 minutes that morning, or like, again, on your best day, when everything goes the way you want to, what are you incorporating so you feel not only prepared in terms of the sequence you have planned, but also prepared in terms of just showing up as your best, most confident self?
Oh, I really like that, especially adding in the whole part of doing meditation or your own self-practice before that. I think that, like you said, we can think, okay, I have to be all ready for this job interview or this thing. I know that when I go to put together a workshop or a podcast or whatever, it just really helps me if I'm grounded in my own practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so to then address the question of kind of after the audition, I would say almost all of the time, in my experience, you're going to get some one-on-one time with an owner or manager, whoever kind of was there to observe the audition or be part of it for you. And so they may give you some feedback on how it went, and do your best to be open to that. And I think, so it's interesting. I do bring in quite a bit from my acting experience, but there was, I would say, much more in that world. There was this sort of aesthetic of like when you would get notes or feedback, you just like the proper response is thank you. and that's it. And so there is no other proper response. And not always the case, but I think one thing that's nice about yoga is there's a little less of that sort of formality and that sort of power structure. So definitely do your best to separate feedback from kind of hurting your feelings. But at the same time, if there's something you don't understand or you're curious about, like, feel free to engage in some questions or some dialogue around that. Oh, how would you structure this thing that, you said kind of felt awkward to you? Like, what would you do instead? And that shows that you're interested in learning and evolving and growing as a teacher. So there's that piece, kind of getting the feedback, and then hopefully the auditioner will kind of offer to you what the next steps are. Either it's, yes, we'd love to add you to our sub list right now, or I'll be in touch with some more information. And I would kind of take that in, and then before the conversation concludes, just kind of repeat back like what that clear plan is. So great. So you'll be in touch in the next couple of days to let me know if I'm in, or to let me know, the information to start subbing, or like whatever it is, so that you can just kind of reiterate it to them. And that way also you've set a clear expectation. And if for some reason you don't hear from them in a couple of days, then it's much easier to say like, hey, just checking in on this thing that we discussed, and to follow up with them. So you kind of need to let them lead the way on what that looks like. But if things feel sort of fuzzy or unclear, definitely ask some questions to kind of clarify, okay, what are the next steps? What's going to happen here? And then if things aren't happening within that given time frame, it's okay to take that initiative and follow up on your own.
Awesome. Okay, so best case scenario is then you have a new sub job or a new teaching job, and worst case scenario is you kind of start back at number one, right?
Yeah. Worst case scenario is probably they say, thanks but no thanks. This doesn't feel like the right fit for us. And I think that if that's the feedback you're getting during that conversation, it's worth asking what you could be doing to improve. Because hopefully you've done the work of identifying, I think this studio would be the right fit for me. And so maybe two things, right? Either there was a sort of missing kind of self-awareness that sort of misidentified that place as a good fit for you. So that's one thing that might have happened. Or the other thing is that the audition itself just didn't feel, like a good fit or up to their level of what they're looking for in teachers in terms of skill, or something like that. And so it's kind of, if you can get some information to identify maybe which one of those categories the no falls under, I think that could be helpful. And just kind of reframing how you would move forward.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that we kind of take a look inside, what maybe didn't connect there, and that we also ask people, why didn't this, that's a really great point. I think that often we're not we have that moment where we go to, in this case, sell like, this is my yoga to someone, or it can be a physical product. And this is kind of getting into marketing mindset, but there's always the, like, why did you decide not to? What was it? We can learn a lot from that question.
Absolutely. And, a situation of sort of miscalibrated fit, I would say that is more likely to be an opportunity where you're saying, I'm probably going to move on and look elsewhere. On the other hand, if it's, you're a really great fit here, we just don't think you're quite ready yet, or, whatever that might be, then that might be the place that you go back to a year from now and ask to re-audition when you've sharpened your skills.
Right.
So you would kind of take different actions depending on the feedback that you're getting.
Right. Well, that's fantastic. Is there anything else that you can think of that you would let teachers know about in that whole process of approaching a new yoga studio?
I would say just keeping in mind, I think the most important thing is what we talked about at the beginning, that keeping in mind that it doesn't need to come from a place of desperation. It can absolutely come from a place of personal choice, and this approach of, I want to find places where I'm going to love teaching and where they're really going to value me as well, because those are the best partnerships between studio and teacher that you can really have.
I like that a lot. And so if people want to work with you further, how can they do that?
Absolutely. So they can find me at edgeofthemat.com, and I've got free download there, which I will definitely get you the link for. So I think it would be a nice compliment. It'll be sort of the next piece, which is the Yogi's Guide to Teaching at a New Studio. So that's a checklist of covers what kind of questions you need to ask once you have gone through this process and you actually get that gig at the new studio, and what you need to know as a new teacher from there. I also offer group coaching, private coaching, and am in the process of developing some online content and programs as well.
It's amazing. Your website looks fantastic. Did I read that it's a brand new kind of...
Brand new. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really in love with it. So my designer was June Mango, and I can't speak highly enough of her. And she's got an incredible 3-day or 5-day intensive website process. And so yeah, it was a really, really great experience.
That is amazing. Well, I'm excited also that our listeners can have that checklist that you said. It also is a great resource. And like you said, it is the next thing. So thank you so much for taking the time today, Kristen.
You're welcome, Shannon. Thank you.
Okay, connected yoga teachers, how are you feeling after all of that really concrete information? Thank you, Kristen, for making these into actionable steps that we can all really take a look at before we approach that yoga studio. I love that there's all of this building up to getting hired at that yoga studio. And then if you're wanting more of this, Kristen has supplied a PDF that's very helpful once if you're like, okay, what are the next steps now? So that is in our show notes. Again, theconnectedyogateacher.com/64 is where you can find all of the show notes. Let me do a little recap here. And again, these are listed out in our show notes. So step 1 is to discern which yoga studio really fits your values, your yoga teaching style, etc. Do your skills and your yoga style match what the studio is looking for and offering? What studios, gyms, or community centers are in your area that are close to you and easy to commute to? What is the community vibe like? What is the class size like there? What do you want your experience as a yoga teacher to be, and what studios really fit that? So we turn it around. We're not looking from this place of desperation. Instead, we're discerning, we're being choosy, and we're looking at it like, does this really fit the yoga that I want to offer? So take a variety of classes at the locations that you feel are a good fit, and you might find out, oh yeah, I was really right about this, or I'm not sure if this one's a good fit. Kristen offered that we could approach the teacher after class, that we tell them, thank you for the class. We share something that we really find is something that resonates with our own values about the studio or the community, something we really like. We share our name, let them know that we're a yoga teacher and we're interested in teaching opportunities at that studio, and that we're interested in how we find out and connect with someone about an audition. We touched on the resume, that you can attach this to an email, that we're not just leaving a piece of paper at the studio, and that this email is sent to the owner or the manager, and that this is optional. I want to add in here that we can also look at having our resume on our website in case people are going to our website and saying, so-and-so was here, they left a card, I'm interested in what they do and what they offer, and they are going to go to our website, or sometimes they go to our Facebook page and then find our website through that. Number 3 is plan and prepare for your audition. I love how Kristen said, really the structure is what gives us freedom here. So get some information first. Is it a solo pretend class, or is it an actual class, or will it be that round robin that we talked about? Know the amount of time, the number of people, the lighting, the music, kind of all of those questions. Create a plan and make this plan solid, that it even has this tiny class arc, that we're not, really heavy on moving through something and then we forget the Shavasana. I love how Kristen said, include Shavasana, even if it's just 1 minute, and to show up as your best, most confident self. So that might be something that we do externally, like this is my favorite yoga outfit, or I really need to settle in, do my meditation, have the best day possible before I go in and approach this yoga studio. Number 4 is one-on-one time with the owner or manager when and if that happens. Be really open to the feedback. Ask questions so that you can grow and evolve as a yoga teacher, and clarify when and how that contact or that follow-up will happen. So I think that is a key piece right there. Number 5 is the follow-up if we haven't heard back. And number 6 is when we find out that yes, no, or maybe. If we find out yes, you have you're on our sub list, or yes, you have a spot teaching at our studio, kind of go to Kristen's next steps once you're hired at a yoga studio, or find out from this studio, where do we go next? If it's a no or it's a maybe, it's such a great learning opportunity right then for us really to open up. It does involve a lot of vulnerability, but to be able to ask, I'm curious as to why the studio is feeling like I'm not a good fit, and we really need to go into this with a real openness and vulnerability so that it doesn't come across as a challenge to the studio, like, why didn't you hire me? But instead, it would really help me to grow and learn and evolve. I feel like it would be such a benefit if you would share, like, what are some things that might help me in the future, or how could I grow to then be able to work at this yoga studio or other yoga studios? How can you kind of see how I can grow and learn and practice, and ask these people. They are probably experienced yoga teachers. Ask them what they would recommend. So it is going to involve like some, it might feel challenging, hurtful, a little tough for ego, but a great way to check in. Please know that we are rooting for you. We are here for you. If you have questions, ask them in the supportive Facebook group. I love to see when people say, I'm going to do an audition at the yoga studio, wish me luck, and all of the positive comments on there. Let us know if you have specific questions beyond this. Reach out to Kristen, tag her in there as well, or tag me in that post, or share comments in our show notes also. If you are heading out for an audition soon, all the best. We are here supporting you, thinking about you, and we just hope that you rock this, that you give it your best, that you share your yoga, and that you get hired. So take care, connected yoga teachers. Stay connected to self, to your practice, and to your community so that you can really share the yoga that lights you up. Namaste. See you back here next week.